Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Foot Traffic. Today, I am very excited and a little nervous. I have my entire team here with me, and we are in honor of our 5-year anniversary for the podcast. We're doing something a little bit different. So I let them come to me with any questions they have. I don't know what questions they're going to ask me, and we are just going to have a fun, open episode. So I'm going to let Julie come on as kind of like my MC to host with me and, interview my team members. Julie is our podcast producer. She is also in charge of our PR. So Julie, welcome. I'm excited to get to do this today.
Thank you. I think this is a wonderful idea. And I know that you didn't look at the question. So you're kind of in your own hot seat, so to speak. So the first question is actually from Claire. She's working on some projects, but she did supply a couple of questions. But one thing she wanted to ask you, Stacy, is why did you start this company?
Good question. Okay, so I could take this in a couple ways. So it was right when I was about to have Tegan. So about 5+ years ago, I had my second location at my studio. And I did the second location because I was looking for a challenge. I was looking for something else to kind of pull me back in. So let me do a little backstory. So I have been running the studio and bringing on all these amazing people and delegating. And then one day I walked into the studio unannounced. No one knew I was coming. They were in like a little front desk, like a huddle in a little meeting. And they looked at me and they said, "Oh, hey, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just popping in, like just here to say hi." And they were like, "Oh, well, did you need something? Because we're kind of in the middle of something." And I felt so like not needed in a way that I'm like, ugh, like I hate that I just built this business that didn't need me, right? Because I wanted to do something, but at the same time, it was a really cool thing that I was able to do that. So I thought I need a challenge. So my idea was, let me open a second location and give me something to do. So I opened a second location, and within 1 year, I was totally out of that business. I had trained everybody that I needed to train to get that up and running, and it no longer needed me again. So a third location was not going to solve my problem. So I decided I needed another business. I needed another hobby. Like I needed something to do. So I attended a 2-day conference. Darren Hardy put this thing on called High Performance Forum. And I went back probably like 6 years ago, and I walked in the room and I just said, I'm here to figure out what my next business is going to be. I have no idea. And that was what sparked me deciding to do Foot Traffic.
And here you are 5 years later.
Yeah.
Here you are. Thanks for that. All right. Next, we have Cara, who's been with you for several years, both in your brick and mortar and now with the online business. Cara, your question for Stacy?
So knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself 5 years ago when you had the idea to start this business?
I would have said, slow down and just stay focused on one thing. And I see my clients doing this all the time. I would do something. I would be having way too high of standards to the point where maybe it was a little bit of perfectionism coming in. And I would think, ooh, not good enough. Scrap the idea. Next idea. If I could go back and see all the winners that I had done and I had picked and I had like made into a product or I had made into a funnel, if I could have just stayed there, we've had a very successful year, but this year could have been like 2 years ago, right? It could have been faster. So that's what I would say is just like, pick your one thing, stay there, and don't pivot until like you fully maximized it. I'd never maximize anything. I would just do something, put it out there. Okay, next thing. And you've got to slow down.
That sounds about right. That sounds like
it. Right?
You slow down. Okay. Thanks, Cara. Next up is Erica, who's been here, I think just over a year, head of the enrollment team and sales. Erica, what is your question for Stacy?
My question is, I'm really curious, as you have a reflective mindset and not a mindset of regret, if you could change anything from the past 5 years, what would it be and why?
I mean, I kind of go back to Cara's same response. I'm trying to think if there's something else that like I want to pull out. I'm pretty happy with even the regret of, I'll say it, even though I said not to say regret, even the regret of like slowing down, don't do that, stay there. Looking back, it's like but we got here, right? We are 5 years in with a phenomenal year under our belt in a pandemic, right? So it was just part of the journey. And as much as I wish I would have done a few things differently, I'm also just very grateful that maybe I had to learn those lessons to learn whatever that was now, then have to learn a really hard lesson in 5 years from now when the cost would be so much greater, right? So I think, as much as I wish I could go back and change a few things, this is probably the exact spot I'm supposed to be.
Like everything's kind of a learning situation.
Yeah. And I also can teach my clients so much better because I did that and I wish I wouldn't have. And if I didn't learn that hard lesson and I saw one of my clients doing what I was doing, I probably would have been like, yeah, no problem. Try this and let's see. Right. But I now know that that is not the way to get to success as fast as possible.
Very good. Thanks, Erica. Next we have Sarah. And Sarah, I feel like you're new to the team, but you've been here a while, but you're a huge part and kind of the glue. So what is your question for Stacy?
Yes, my question for Stacy is, what other CEOs or podcasters do you look up to and inspire you? So it's a two-part question. And then who is your business role model or models?
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to go with the business role models first, just because I feel like that was pre-podcast. So it feels like that's where my story mostly started. So my first mentor ever was a guy that sent me a postcard in the mail. Like that was just how I met him, was going to a conference in New York City. And I stayed with him for probably 8-9-ish years where I just learned from him. And I think it was so new to me to even think like a business coach, like that's crazy. Like people pay for this, that I never thought to like look outside the box. I am very grateful because I went to the same conference year after year after year for 8 years, the annual conference where his stories didn't change. He had the same jokes. Like I knew what was coming. And it was just that repetition of maximizing. So it's funny when I'm looking at foot traffic, right? I don't think I had any of that repetition. In foot traffic, it's like, oh, I'm going to buy this online course and I'm going to buy that thing. And then I'm going to learn from this person. And it's like, I've learned so much, right? But in my brick and mortar, I learned from one guy for 8 years on the same content and I maximized it, right? Like when I say I'm a well-oiled machine, it's probably because of that focus and that just the consistency of the content. And he was amazing. Even though I left eventually, I always think to myself, like, man, I'd love to go back and see what he's doing and what he's up to. It's probably the same jokes, but like the content works. Like it got us to $1 million business. So I'm really grateful. His name was Sam Beckford. I'll say that. I know most people that are listening probably are not dance studios, but that's where I learned about him. Then from there, I switched it up and I went to a couple different dance mentors and gymnastics mentors. And I started to branch out and ask myself, how do I not just learn from dance? Because that's when it started to really like branch out for me. So I would go to somebody who would be teaching gymnastics and karate and all of the other things in the children's industry. And that has really impacted me because I now see like, wow, there was so much benefit in learning from somebody who taught exactly what I did. But there is also a massive benefit to learning from people that do things just a little bit different that you've never heard of in the dance space, right? In your specific industry. So I think that's one of the reasons I always tell people you should have an in your industry mentor and you should have an outside of your industry mentor, because there's benefits to both. Like, if you are somebody who is a dentist, right? I can definitely share some amazing strategy with you, but I don't know the dental practice like somebody else who owns a dental practice, right? But at the same time, the person who owns a dental practice has been doing the same thing the same way for decades, right? And I might bring something a little different that you haven't heard of before. So I think it's really, really important to have both. Okay. As far as, and this now a kind of podcasting goes with like my online mentors. I mean, I'm very similar to, I think, a lot of online business owners where you get into this space, you find one person. So I went to Darren Hardy. I heard about Darren Hardy from one of my dance mentors. That's how I got there. When I was there, Darren did not pitch anything moving forward. It was like, this is it. We're done. It's been 2 days. Have fun. Like, see you later. And I'm like, where do I go from here? And somebody said, you should go check out this guy named Brendan Burchard. right? So all of a sudden I hear about Brendan. I start listening to Brendan's podcast. Then Brendan mentions Amy Porterfield or Marie Forleo, right? Like it just starts, you start going down that rabbit hole. And this is where it can get really exciting because there's so many people out there you've never heard of. But at the same time, I always tell people, pick like 1 to 3 podcasts you love and obsess and consume over, so you can just get that content in and nail it like I did back in the day with my dance mentor. And then, yes, it's fun to kind of like spice it up a little bit sometimes and pick somebody new or different, but just be careful that you're not always podcast jumping, because all that's going to do is confuse you when you need to stay focused, right? That was probably one of my mistakes as well. It was just like, oh, I've got to do YouTube and then I got to do Pinterest and then I got to go. And it was like, I couldn't even finish anything because I already had been fed the next idea.
Very good. Thank you, Stacy. And thanks for those questions.
Yeah, good question, Sarah.
So next we have Alicia. Alicia is a little newer to the team, but you have been
not new to my worlds. Yeah,
exactly. Been part of Stacy's world for quite some time. So Alicia, would you ask your question of Stacy? What do you want to know?
Of course, of course. So I want to shift to the podcast specifically. So at what point in the past, since you started your podcast, did you realize that it had become an integral part of growing your business? And how could you tell when that happened?
Yeah. So what's funny is people say like, wow, you've only been in business 5 years and you have a podcast that's 5 years old. Like that's really odd that you started with a podcast, right? So how that happened was I went to this Darren Hardy event, made some connections. There was a guy there that said, you need a podcast. Like you should totally have a podcast. Like you'd be great at it. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure I was already listening to podcasts at the time, but podcasting was not what it is today. So I started a podcast immediately. And I think I thought that this was just going to be the thing that built my business right away. And it wasn't. It was a very slow start. If you're talking about me coming into the online world and then starting a podcast immediately, I had 0 followers, like not even some, not even like 100, not even like 500. There was nobody to tell that I had a podcast, right? So for the first year, I released 3 episodes a week. And these weren't just like repurposing, or this was like 3 real episodes every single week, 2 full pieces of content with 1 interview. And I did it consistently for a year. And I was so burnt out. I would never recommend anybody do that ever, especially your first year without a team. Do not do that. But I'm one of those people, like I go all in. So if I know I need downloads and I know I need this, I'm going to do it. Right. But it didn't help me that first year. It helped me find my voice. It helped me find how to interview. It helped me like get myself out there that way. But monetization wise, it really I didn't see like a fast impact on it. So I think after I was burnt out for a little bit and I hosted a live event. And when people came to the live event, they were bringing up the podcast, like, and they like knew things about like Tegan and Tanner, and like the way they were talking to me, it was like they knew me, right? So I decided, okay, I need to come home and I need to start to really think about this podcast and like how I could make this better, because I was not focused on it. In fact, it was like something I didn't want to focus on because of how burnt out I was. So year 2, I immediately went from 3 to 1. So 3 episodes to 1 a week, because I just didn't have the time and energy to do what I was doing. And then I started to look at my numbers. And when I started to look at, oh, wow, people are listening, and look how many countries people are listening from, and how many downloads will appear in just the matter of a couple hours of releasing the episode and things like that. That's when I started to get excited. So I always tell people, if you're going to do anything, you've got to track your numbers, because without tracking, you don't get to feel the effect. I literally thought no one was listening to my podcast, right? I thought like, why am I doing this? I'm not hearing anything about it. No one's tagging me or shouting me out, or like that didn't exist, and Facebook Live wasn't a thing 5 years ago. So I didn't record anything live. I did it in my house by myself with a microphone and headphones, right? And then it would air like 3 weeks later, and I would have no connection with my customer or my potential customer at all. And the second we flipped that and started asking ourselves, how do we start to repurpose and put on social media? How do we get them to tag or leave a review so we can see their feedback? The more excited I think I eventually got about it. Did I answer your question? I don't even remember what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Alicia.
You did. Yes. Thanks, Alicia. All right. So next we have Trisha. Trisha has also been part of Stacy's role for a long time, the brick and mortar, and now with the online. Trisha, what's your question?
What are your top 3 lessons learned from the past 5 years?
Oh man. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to have to say profit first. And I'm going to sound like just like I'm beating this like crazy, but I am going to bring it up because I did business very wrong for a long, long time. Like a long, long time. I didn't pay myself forever because I felt like I wanted to just put the money back in the business. I didn't feel a need to reward myself or pay myself. I didn't I didn't even look at profit margins. It didn't matter to me. What I looked at was top of the like top line. I looked at how much are we grossing? How can we hit 500,000? How can we go to 750,000? How can we go for $1 million? And it didn't matter if that million costed me 990,000 to get there, right? It didn't matter. So I was never going in debt to hit those numbers. But I definitely wasn't trying to profit or it was like, I started all of these businesses because I love the challenge. I love the growth. I like trying things new. And I never had heard of like a profit margin being a challenge before. I had never heard of like, well, you're going to need to pay yourself to stay motivated to want to pour back into the business and things like that. So I think maybe profit first we've been doing for 3 years. And I'll tell you guys, my CPA always says to me, I'm like a massive success story in his eyes, because if you would have seen what I looked like 3 years ago, and if you would see what I look like today financially, I'm a different person. And now we're like tackling the studio and going back and erasing a lot of those bad habits and fixing and changing and tweaking and all of that. And so I have to say that because I am a different person, because not so much just of the books inspired me, but then hiring the right CPA to implement those things and to say like, you don't have enough money to spend $10,000 on this program. You have to make that money next month if you want to spend it, right? I had never thought that way. I was like, no, I want it. I'm going to buy it. And then I would figure it out later. Now I'm like, oh, I want that $10,000 thing. What can I do next month to make $10,000 to go get that thing, right? And that has been a game changer. So that I'll say is number one. This was lessons learned. Okay, lessons learned. Oh, I'll bring up the fact that we've headed in a direction the last year of adding commissions, and we will be heading over the next year of really understanding and learning about profit share and motivating the team to really see the potential to be here a long time, to get rewarded with the success of not the work that we're putting in, but the outcomes we're producing. Right? Before, we would give raises on how long you've been here, that you're showing up, you're consistent, you're doing a good job, but we didn't look at what are you actually producing for the company? What is the outcome your work is providing? And I think the more I dive into that, the more I'm like, whoa, you are not going to be able to stop us, because we are going to be, we already are on fire, and just wait till we start to put more and more of this in place. So I think, bringing everybody in on that is going to be really cool. And just the places that we're heading this year is going to be a game changer. 2020 was amazing. 2021 is going to be crazy, like crazy, crazy good. And we're really excited. So, okay, number 2. Okay, number 3. Oh, man. I kind of want to go back, and I'm going to just keep repeating myself, because these are the things that I have to say is just like the focus, right? Doing less better. If you could just look at like what is actually producing results and just lean into that and get rid of the rest of the stuff. And it's hard because you're like, oh, but I have to do podcasts, or I have to do social media, or I have to do it. Yes, but you have to do it well, or you won't get the results you're looking for anyway. And you know what? I'll pour into this too. Doing less better. My team knows my calendar has been so horrible this year. Like 9 to 3 sounds like, how could that be bad? Like you're barely working, right? Some people work like 50, 60, 70 hours. Yes, but when you're 9 to 3 is so jam-packed that you're like, Kristen said to me, when are you eating today? like, that's a great question, Kristen. I am not sure when I'm eating and I have no idea when I'm going to the bathroom. Like, those are questions that I shouldn't have to ask myself about my schedule. And this year, it is so much better already. And I think just giving myself time to breathe and time to think. And we're recording this after the holiday. So we just had off, Christmas weekend and New Year's weekend, long weekends, right? So those are 8 days right there of just like thinking and dreaming and brainstorming and goal setting. And the ideas that I have come up with, or just the way that I'm like ready to get back to work, I haven't had a lot of those days this year because I've just been so jam packed. And I could have eliminated some of those things out of my calendar last year. And that's the part where I think I'm like, I want to do everything, but doing everything isn't going to get you to results as fast as possible. Thanks, Trisha.
Yep. Thank you, Trisha, for that. And thank you for Stacy. Brianna is up next. Brianna, who is part of the social media team and does all kinds of wonderful, amazing things. Brianna, what's your question?
My question for Stacy is, what strategy do you feel has been the most beneficial for the growth of your business these past 5 years?
Yeah. Okay. Good one. So I'm going to say building my network, right? I've gotten a lot of cool things that have happened, but it usually comes from a person, a company, right? Like, there are things that I have been able to do because I knew that person, who told me about that person, who introduced me, who connected me, who said they should do this or be on my podcast or any of that. So I think the biggest thing is building my network. And I definitely have had a paid strategy and an organic strategy with that too, which is funny because just in marketing in general, we always talk about you need both, right? I've paid to be in masterminds. I've paid to get in rooms. Darren Hardy's event was $10,000 for 2 days. I paid to walk in that room and get around these people. And then I built this connection with the guy that said, you need a podcast, right? Like, he was in that room with me. We walked away as friends, and he was able to say that, right? And even not only that, so he was so good to me, or really nice to me. And he's like, let's do a practice interview, because you've never interviewed anybody before. So he interviewed me, and he said, I'm going to be honest, that was not good. So my first interview ever for the podcast, we didn't air because it was not great. And he said, you brought nothing to the conversation. It was all about me. You interviewed me and you let me answer, but you didn't say anything back. And the reason I thought you'd be really good on a podcast is because we were at a cocktail party at Darren's event, and we were in like a little huddle. You know how you're like talking to like 4 people at a networking event, right? Everybody's drinking a glass of wine or something. And he's like, I would say something and you would engage, and then you'd have your opinion, and then you'd, ask me about this. And he's like, you lit up. You were cocktail party Stacy. That's like what he called me. And he's like, this was not cocktail party Stacy. He's like, this was not something where you brought like anything back to me. He's like, and I want to do this again. And I want you to be that girl. So to have somebody who's like, normally when you interview somebody in their podcast, like they've got to go, they've got a time crunch, they want to move on to the next thing. And he was like, we're going to redo this. Right. And my point is like to pay to be in certain rooms, to make friends with certain people that can then become people, to be honest, to be blunt, to not let me put out a horrible podcast. And not just that, guys, it wasn't just that one podcast. He changed the way I interviewed for the last 5 years. I now know that I don't have to be like, oh, great answer. Okay, next question, right? Like I get to continue to be myself and engage with people. And then I'm building real relationships with people on the podcast, because they're like, literally, I jump off a podcast and it took me a while to believe people, but people would say like, wow, you're really good at interviewing. And I was like, oh, thanks. And then I had this one guy who was like, I'm not just saying this, like I have been interviewed hundreds of times for my books, and you are one of the best interviewers I have ever had. And it was like, after hearing people say this more and more, I'm like, man, I am good at interviewing. Like I am good at, sharing and engaging and doing that. Okay. And I totally forgot the question again, because now I'm just going off on my tangent. My marketing strategy. So my point is like, getting around these people, having people that are at a certain level, building a real network, going deep with people, and then giving honest feedback has gotten me to get better at these things that like I'm somewhat good at some of them, or I'm kind of good, or sometimes I'm not good at all because I've never done it before, but I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to listen. And that's why people will give me more feedback, why that guy will say something else to me, right? If I am not doing something that he sees, right? Like I've had friends that will call me up and be like, listen, your podcast has a really bad echo and you need to figure out your mic situation, right? These are people that I have built my network with, and now I don't pay them. Now I'm in peer-led masterminds, and I built networks of people because I've already paid before, right? I put in those strategies. So I think the biggest thing is just like having that organic networking strategy of DMing a random person on Instagram saying, I love what they're doing, right? And I'd love to connect. Like I have made really good friends on Instagram. I hired Claire because we were Periscope friends. We literally met on Periscope 5 years ago, you guys. We were internet friends, and she's been with the company now 4 years, right? So I think, and that was a strategy, right? That was building our network. She was being strategic with me just as I was being strategic with her. And that was a free strategy, but then there's other places that I've paid. So I think that is the biggest thing I could share is like, how are you building your network? What is the organic free strategy you've got for 2021? And what's the paid strategy you have? You should have both. I love that question, Brianna. That was so good.
Perfect. Thank you. Cocktail Stacy. I like that.
I know.
Too.
And what's so funny is, you guys, anybody on my team knows like I'm not fun. I'm not even a big drinker. So what does Cocktail Stacy even look like? I don't know, but he just meant more like the engaging piece, right? So anybody that's ever thinking about a podcast and you want to interview somebody, please take all those tips from my first horrible podcast interview ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Next up is Michelle, who wears a ton of different hats. I like to call you like the Facebook ad guru, but that's not the appropriate title, but also involved with social media on the team. Michelle, what you got for Stacy?
All right, so I want you to spill the tea right now.
Okay.
I want to know who have been your top 3 guests. I've never seen you fangirl, but I know probably deep inside you were fangirling. So spill the tea. Let's hear it.
For sure. Okay, that's a good point because I don't fangirl, and that is also a strategy when it comes to networking, right? Let's go there because this is just something different too we haven't talked about. So if you want to see yourself in a room with somebody, in a conversation with somebody, and you want to kind of feel like an equal, or you want them to see you as an equal, the worst thing you could do is fangirl, right? Because that just makes them think like, oh, great. Like it's just a different conversation, right? And I've had to be very strategic about like, keep it together, hold it in, do not say anything. Now, like I am going to bring up Susie Orman because that to me is then like, holy cow, like I've been watching this lady since I was like 20 in my duplex with all this debt, like trying to figure out how I'm going to get rid of like all this craziness. And then to be sitting here interviewing her, and Julie, I'm going to give you credit where credit is due because you got her on the show. So that was amazing. So I would say definitely Susie. Now, I didn't fangirl, but I did bring up, like, I've been watching you, I've been listening to you. You can say it in a way where you're acknowledging and honoring their work without feeling like, does that make sense? Like, I can't even describe it. I mean, just imagine if somebody came up to you and like, oh my goodness, you're amazing, I love you, and you're like, okay, it's like you start to get nervous too, right? And then I start to get uncomfortable because I have had some of those moments where people are flat out telling me like, I'm so nervous to talk to you right now. And then you've just made me nervous, right? So at least don't put that pressure on somebody else. Let them be normal and you'll work out your nerves, right? If Susie knew that I was so nervous to interview her, right? The conversation, she'd been thinking about me and trying to help me versus I needed her to think about you, the audience, right? So I'll say Susie for sure. I'll say Amy Porterfield, not now because we are friends now, but when I first met her, I will tell you this, dude, this is hilarious. So I was at an event, I was at Social Media Marketing World. And I was friends with Jill and Josh Stanton. We were in a mastermind together. And I'm hanging out with Jill and she's like, oh, I'm actually heading to the Cheesecake Factory with Amy Porterfield. Do you want to come? And I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, I am going to the Cheesecake Factory with Amy Porterfield. Like in my mind, she was like this crazy big, like I couldn't even believe it. And I remember like getting there and somebody was sitting next to her. I think it was Josh actually. Josh, Jill's husband. And Josh stood up and he's like, oh, take my seat. And he literally put me next to her. And I'm like, how am I going to eat next to Amy? And what am I going to say? And what am I going to bring up? And what I'm going to do? And I mean, she never knows, like, doesn't know any part of this. And then all of a sudden we were in a mastermind together the next year. And again, didn't fangirl, just acted normal. I probably didn't even ask her for a photo together for like a year and a half. Okay. And it was more of, we're friends now, we take photos, versus like, can I have a picture with you? And the same thing, like with her podcast, like I never asked her to get on her show. Like I wanted to keep that relationship. Like people will ask me, like, could you get me on Amy's show? I'm like, listen, I didn't get myself on Amy's show, so I'm definitely not getting you on Amy's show. Like I wanted to keep those relationships real and authentic. And the second you fangirl, it kind of like diminishes it a little bit. So, okay. So I'm going to say Amy is one. I mean, there's big names. Like people make me nervous. And sometimes I get nervous with somebody I've never even heard of before, or somebody I've never even, because it's like, where is this conversation going to go? And are we going to hit it off? Because this is sometimes we meet people, we think, oh, they're going to be great. But we have to gel. Like we have to make sure we hit it off and we're like connecting that way. Am I not thinking of anybody that I probably had this moment with? I mean, I'm sure there's many, many more, but those are two names that pop up. And like I said, now Amy, it's normal. But like there was a time when she freaked me out a little bit. Probably, I can't think of anybody else. I'd have to like see the list of names, but there's been some big ones for sure. Oh, and even in the beginning too, I'll bring this up. I remember thinking like, I can't believe this person said yes to me. Like one of my first interviews was Denise Duffield Thomas. And 5 years ago, I mean, she's big now, but 5 years ago, she was like there was not that many massive people out there. And to me, she was a massive person. And Jill Stanton said yes. And just like some of these bigger names where I'm like, how are these people saying yes to me? The podcast wasn't even live. They couldn't even check it out, meaning there were no reviews. They couldn't hear if I was good. They had no idea, right? But 5 years ago, they were in a place like I was last year, just saying yes to every single thing I possibly could, right? I was probably one of their yes to everything. And every time I jumped on one of those interviews, I was so crazy nervous. So I hope that answered that.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. All right, so we have time for one, maybe two more questions.
Okay.
And so next up from our enrollment team is Kristen. Kristen, what is your question?
Okay, any new things you want to try on the podcast in 2021?
Really good question. Okay, yes. So I definitely want to see the frequency increase, even though I just told you, like, don't do 3. It's different doing 3 if you have a team behind you. So I'd like to see more episodes coming out on the podcast. Definitely, Julie and I are going to go after some very big guests. So I'm excited to bring really amazing people here. We are going to do more on-air coaching. We haven't done that in a while. And I think it was just because my schedule was so maxed out. I was like, when in the world would I be able to do more on-air coaching? So we've got a lot more on-air coaching coming back, where we're going to be bringing on some of our foot traffic formula and powerhouse clients. So that's going to be coming. I don't know. Julie, am I missing anything?
I don't think you're missing anything. I think it's the bigger the names, but I think, you had talked about wanting to get people on to do some coaching because that's what you're known for. And I think when people really hear real people and their stories and what you've taught them and what you're working through with them, that's going to be really big.
Yeah. And I think one of my like zone of genius is when like, if you are listening and you've never hired me before, worked with me before, you just see me as a teacher and I talk and I tell you like XYZ. But I feel like my real zone of genius is pulling out the ideas of somebody when they're like, what could I do for this funnel? Or what could I have for this product? I'm like, oh my goodness, like get a pen and paper out. Like, here you go. Like, write this down. Right. And I need to show more of that on the podcast, because when you see like what I really do, right. I think it is absolutely going to help with our programs and getting the right person to want to join. So I think that will be a big shift this year too.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. If I can sneak in one question.
Yeah, please.
This would be from myself.
Okay. Are you the last person? Did everybody go?
I am the last person.
Okay, cool.
It ends here. so I know a lot of people come to you and they have excuses, and you don't even allow that. You're like, no, you help people cut through the overwhelm, right? Like that's what the implementation code is about, like, dealing with fear, working through accountability. And a lot of people want to start a podcast, so they say, but they say, oh, there's too much competition. Aha. But you're always a huge proponent of being different or being a standout in your business. How are you different than other podcasters as far as your area of expertise? What sets you apart?
Yeah. And I'm going to go on a tangent. So remind me what this question is in just a minute. I can say that too, because when I say like, oh, there's competition, right? I've been doing this for 5 years. So you're like, well, I'm 5 years behind you. Yes. But what's happening in the podcasting world is every celebrity, every Real Housewife and like Bachelorette is coming out with their podcast, and they have a massive following. So I can be working my butt off for 5 years on a podcast, and the latest Bachelorette can come on today and knock me right off the charts. Right. So I think if you're thinking, oh, but Stacy has this, no, I do not, right? I have a different competitor than you do, okay? Now, again, like now it leads perfectly into, well, what makes me different? Why would somebody listen to me over this person, over that person, right? Well, I think we resonate with people that are similar. So if you hear a Bachelorette talk about the business she just started, it's like, well, yes, but you have 1 million followers. So it might be a little bit easier than somebody like me who's starting from scratch, right? I'm from Wisconsin, and we have a lot of Midwestern, I would say East Coast listeners. And a lot of times it's because they're saying, well, if she can do it, if she's from like a small, country town in Wisconsin, if she's grew up doing this, then maybe I could do it too. If she started with no followers and nobody from her other business, then maybe I could do it too, right? So I think you have to really ask yourself, like, who are you? And how do you become more of who you are? When I started, I was trying to be like everybody else, thinking that that was going to get me where I wanted to go. And I didn't talk about the dance studio, and I didn't talk about being from Wisconsin, because I thought those things would be a negative thing, or people be like, oh, she's just from Wisconsin. Like, people aren't really doing anything big there. Or like, oh, she owns a dance studio. My kid goes to a dance studio. It's not very successful. Like, I didn't want that to hurt me. And the more I talked about like, no, this is who I am, and this is where I'm from, and this is what I'm doing. And yes, I'm a mom, and yes, I am a wife, and all of these things, people started to resonate with me for being that person. So a lot of people that follow me are very similar to me. So how do I compete with a Bachelorette? It's because my person might not be interested in that story, or might not want the business advice of somebody who has 1 million followers, right? Nothing against the Bachelorette. I totally watch it. Not this last season because it was awful, but normally I do. So that's what I'm going to say is like, how do you to the fullest extent, right? I'm not saying that you get to stay in your comfort zone. You just have to ask yourself, like, what else could I do? What else could I share? Even if you're like, people don't care. Why would people care? They do care. Like people are nosy. They want to see stuff. They love reality shows for a reason, right? So the more you can like put yourself out there, I think that is how you're going to get faster growth this year.
Just be you.
Yeah.
Just be you. Well, that's it. Those are the questions from the team. So this is fun.
Thank you, Julie. This was so exciting. So here's another little backstory, guys, is we move quickly. We're like, I want something fun for the 5-year episode. I'm pretty sure we came up with this idea last week, Monday. Here we are today recording it. And here's the thing, you guys, sometimes you're going to be like, oh, you should be batching. It should be 6 weeks out. It should be, yes, sometimes in a perfect world, that is what it should look like. And sometimes when you are having a great year, but you're just trying to keep your head above water, we are a little bit more last minute than we'd like to be, but we're getting there. And it's also like, I don't know that we would have had this idea, just like talking in a group, being on a team call and going like, oh, this would be fun. And then somebody says something and then somebody adds to it and it ends up with this. So this was super fun. Thank you guys all for participating. I have loved this so much. A big thank you to the listeners. For those of you, this was an honor on our 5-year anniversary. Some of you have been listening for 5 years, which is crazy. And I can't believe you stuck with me even in that first year when I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm just so grateful for all of you. We track our reviews, we track our downloads. We look at all of that every single week. We see you, even though you might not think you can be seen. Like we know you're here. We read the reviews. And you guys, we are just so grateful for you. And I say we because it's not just me. You hear me every week, but it's this entire team that helps like come up with the ideas and helps edit it and promote it, like put it on social media, all of the things. So big thank you to the entire team here at Foot Traffic, and a big thank you to you guys for listening. We appreciate you so much. Please do me the biggest favor and tag me on social media with your biggest takeaway or thing you learned from this. I hope this was really helpful. All right. Bye, everyone.